I'm Dr. J, and I speak to dead people. Sigmund Freud was not only the father of modern psychotherapy, he revolutionized how we understand ourselves. Concepts such as the unconscious, defense mechanism, repression, ego, narcissism, all terms coined by Freud have become part of our shared understanding. Born in 1856 in Austria, Freud dared to explore the unseen forces within us, our forbidden desires, fears, hidden conflicts. His revolutionary talking cure with the reliving of childhood traumas and emotional catharsis laid the groundwork for modern psychotherapy. Freud's provocative theories on sexuality and childhood, especially the Oedipus complex, sparked debates that still rage today. His influence, not just on psychology, but art, literature, and culture, remains pervasive. Get ready for an intimate conversation with the trailblazer of modern psychology. Dr. Freud is about to reveal the secrets of the unconscious mind and how we can tap into this hidden world to unlock our potential for healing and growth. Dr. Freud, are you there?
Yes, Dr. J, I am here.
Dr. Freud, what do you believe was your greatest gift to the world?
The development of psychoanalysis. By delving into the unconscious mind, I introduced a profound method to understand human behavior, illuminating the intricate workings of our inner lives.
Now, psychoanalysis was really the precursor to psychotherapy as we know it today. I want to focus on the unconscious because this was absolutely groundbreaking. The idea that the self is not just what I'm aware of, but in fact, perhaps the larger part of the self is what I'm not aware of.
The concept of the unconscious was revolutionary. It suggested that a vast portion of our mental life exists beyond our conscious awareness. This reshaped our view of the self. What drives us lies hidden beneath the surface of conscious thought.
Now, you have a really neat model of the self, the id, ego, and superego.
Yes, the id is the primitive part, driven by basic instincts and desires. The superego embodies moral standards and ideals. The ego, functioning as the mediator, navigates between these forces, balancing our primal urges with societal expectations, while also considering reality. This dynamic interplay shapes our behavior and personality.
So if we think about the id as those primal instincts, those sometimes forbidden desires, and also the more basic desires like hunger, and then the superego, our higher values, social expectations, and then the ego is mediating in between. So the ego has got a lot of work to do to resolve the conflict, because what the id wants is not what the superego wants. The superego wants social approval. The id wants to get what the id wants.
The ego indeed has a challenging role. It must navigate the often conflicting demands of the id and superego, while also dealing with the reality of the external world.
Dr. Freud, you were a neurologist, and neurology was the forerunner of psychiatry. You were a medical doctor. You studied the brain. What I find fascinating about your model is how it maps much of our understanding of the brain. Neuroscience tells us we've got a higher brain, our prefrontal neocortex, where we've got high order functioning. That's where we've got our values, our morality, our ability to empathize, our ability to conform to societal expectations. We could call this in part the superego. Then we've got the lower brain, where we've got motivational impulses, the amygdala that produces our fight or flight response to danger. We know that the higher brain evolved later. So in many respects, your model seems to map the brain, yet that's not something you knew at the time, was it?
That's correct. The internal conflicts we experience between our primal desires and our moral values are reflected in the anatomy of our brain. This challenges the notion of a singular, unified self, showing instead a dynamic interplay between different parts of our psyche.
Tell us about how the ego navigates these internal conflicts.
The ego employs various defense mechanisms to manage these pressures, striving to maintain a sense of balance and stability within the psyche. It's a complex and dynamic process, essential for our psychological well-being.
These defense mechanisms are fascinating because they give us a practical way to understand how the ego manages threats. Give us an example of these defense mechanisms.
Repression. This is where distressing thoughts or memories are unconsciously blocked from entering awareness, shielding the individual from emotional pain. Yet it continues to influence behavior and emotions. This mechanism helps the ego manage internal conflict and external pressures.
I mean, the first case that really brought the unconscious to your attention was your patient, Anna.
Ah, yes, Anna O. Her case greatly influenced my thinking. Anna O coined the term talking cure, as her symptoms of hysteria seemed to improve her verbal expression of the thoughts and feelings. This case underscored the significance of the unconscious mind and the therapeutic potential of bringing repressed memories to consciousness through talking.
I always thought that you had coined the term talking cure, which I think is such a great description of psychotherapy. The fact that I can just talk about my thoughts, feelings, and traumas, and that itself can bring me great relief. I think it adds greater credibility that your patient, Anna O, came up with the term talking cure. So she really felt the benefit. Let's talk a little bit more about her. What was revealed from the unconscious, and how did that lead to her healing?
Anna O suffered from a range of symptoms, including paralysis, hallucinations, and speech difficulties. Through the talking cure, she began to recall and articulate traumatic experiences, many related to caring for her dying father. As she brought these repressed memories to the surface, her symptoms gradually diminished. This case illustrated how unconscious conflicts can manifest as physical or psychological symptoms, and how verbal expression could lead to healing.
Dr. Freud, you noticed in a lot of your patients, there seemed to be sexual abuse, sexual trauma at a very early age. One can certainly understand how something like that would be very threatening to the conscious mind, particularly when that sexual abuse was happening within families.
In the initial stages of my work, I formulate the seduction theory, suggesting that such early traumas were the root of hysterical symptoms. However, I later revised my views, recognizing that while actual abuse could occur, the unconscious mind also generates fantasies and desires, which can be just as influential in shaping psychological distress. This shift in understanding was pivotal in the evolution of psychoanalytic theory.
Now, Dr. Freud, this has become rather controversial because in the modern world, we've seen how pervasive sexual abuse is. Some people believe that you initially noticed sexual abuse and then, and this is a term which I think probably is an adaptation of some of your own thinking, we call this gaslighting in the modern era, where then the victim becomes the culprit, right? In this case, no, it wasn't that you were being abused by your father. It was that actually you had a secret desire to be with your father, right? That's the Oedipus complex.
Initially, my focus on actual abuse as a source of neuroses highlighted a very real and pervasive issue. My later development of theories such as the Oedipus complex shifted the emphasis towards internal fantasies and desires. The balance between acknowledging external trauma and internal conflict remains a complex issue.
Some people have gone so far as to say that you were shifting blame onto the victim.
My aim was always to uncover the complex interplay between external experiences and internal processes. I sought to understand the human psyche in all its intricacies, acknowledging that both real experiences and unconscious fantasies shape our mental landscapes. The truth likely lies in a nuanced understanding of both aspects.
Dr. Freud, I got to ask you, where did you find the courage to talk about such taboo topics, childhood sexuality, during a time of incredibly strict social norms when a furious backlash was inevitable?
Regardless of societal norms, I believed that it was necessary to delve into uncomfortable areas, including sexuality and childhood experiences. The backlash was indeed fierce, but the pursuit of knowledge and the well-being of my patients drove me to challenge conventional boundaries.
Well, I, along with so many others, are immensely grateful that you were willing to weather that opprobrium. Plumbing the depths of the human mind has made us all much richer in our understanding, Dr. Freud. In fact, one of the things that occurred to me is that when we think of ourselves, right, we're usually thinking about our ego. We're thinking about that sort of somewhat idealized sense of self that doesn't really take account of our baser instincts. And I'd like us to look at the defense mechanisms, because those defense mechanisms show us how we are often concealing our dark side. One of your early colleagues, Carl Jung, what he called the shadow. And what I've found is that being willing to acknowledge my shadow, being willing to delve into the deeper parts of myself has actually made me, yes, more aware, but more forgiving, understanding that I'm human and these instincts, urges, conflicts, these internal conflicts between what I want to be and what I sometimes am is just part of the human condition. And you can't change what you don't acknowledge. You can't manage what you're not aware of. It does take courage to apply your ideas to one's own life.
Acknowledging our shadow, those darker aspects of ourselves, is essential for true self-understanding and growth. By bringing these elements into the light of consciousness, we can address them, leading to greater self-compassion and empathy for others. It takes courage to confront these internal conflicts, but doing so enriches our understanding and our capacity for growth.
So let's get practical. Let's look at some of these defense mechanisms that many, perhaps most of us, are applying unthinkingly. We looked at repression, Dr. Freud, and that's the big one, right? I mean, that's the one that really helped you to conduct your clinical practice, right? Bringing those childhood traumas to the fore, leading to a catharsis, and in some cases, not all, and we will come back to that, healing. But let's look at the day-to-day, because you didn't just have an impact on clinical practice, on psychotherapy, just understanding how we interact with others and how we sometimes employ these defense mechanisms. So let's look at some of the other defense mechanisms.
Absolutely, Dr. J. Beyond repression, there are several other defense mechanisms we commonly use. For instance, denial involves refusing to accept reality or facts, acting as if a painful event or feeling doesn't exist. Projection involves attributing our own unacceptable thoughts or feelings onto someone else.
Dr. Freud, apologies for interrupting. Let's address one defense mechanism at a time to make this clear to our audience. So that first one, denial. Now, we might see this is something like that the wonderful clinician Kubler-Ross has integrated into her work on death and dying. When you discover that you have a terminal illness and those first stages, maybe to deny it, to rationalize it away, because the idea of death is such an assault on the psyche. Let's look at other examples.
Someone who has a substance abuse problem might refuse to acknowledge the negative impacts their behavior has on their health or relationships, insisting they have control over it. Another example could be a person ignoring clear signs of financial trouble, such as mounting debt and continuing to spend excessively, convincing themselves that everything's fine. Denial serves as a protective mechanism, shielding the individual from the anxiety or pain of facing harsh realities.
And this is short-term protection. If I deny my financial difficulties, continue to spend, I'm going to feel a little bit better now, but I'm going to be a lot worse off later.
Exactly. Denial offers immediate short-term relief from distress, allowing us to avoid confronting difficult emotions or situations. However, this avoidance can prevent us from addressing underlying issues, leading to more significant problems down the line. Denial, while protective in the moment, can ultimately hinder our ability to cope effectively with reality.
Next, you mentioned projection.
Yes, projection, for instance, if someone is feeling aggressive but finds this emotion unacceptable, they might accuse another person of being hostile towards them. It's a way of externalizing uncomfortable emotions, making it easier to avoid confronting them within ourselves.
We see this between the Republicans and the Democrats, the way they both accuse the other of the same thing. You're a fascist. No, you're a fascist. You're the greatest threat to democracy. No, you're the greatest threat to democracy.
In the context of political discourse, when opposing sides project their own fears and negative qualities onto each other, it leads to a cycle of blame and defense. This can hinder constructive dialogue and make it challenging to find common ground. Projection becomes a barrier to understanding and cooperation. Let's consider rationalization. This involves concocting a seemingly logical reason or excuse for behavior or feelings that are actually irrational. For example, a person who fails to get a promotion might rationalize by saying they didn't really want the added responsibility, when in reality, they may feel disappointed or inadequate.
It sounds a lot like the biases that Daniel Kahneman speaks about. One of them would be the self-serving bias or even the self-enhancement bias. So we will interpret information that makes us look good.
Yes, rationalization and the self-serving bias share a tendency to protect our self-esteem. When we rationalize, we create explanations that make us feel better about our actions or circumstances.
What are some of the negative consequences that arise when we use them?
They can distort our perception of reality, making it difficult to address the root causes of our problems. This avoidance can hinder emotional intimacy and lead to misunderstandings in relationships. Additionally, over-reliance on defense mechanisms can stunt personal development, as they may fail to learn healthier ways to cope with stress or conflict. While defense mechanisms serve a protective function, overuse can impede our capacity to engage authentically with ourselves and others.
Once I realized that the self was somewhat fragmented, that I was flawed and fallible and fabulous in those flaws, right? That it was okay to have a shadow. I was more willing to acknowledge that. In fact, acknowledging is going to enable you to deal with them far better than if you're in denial about them, because then they tend to emerge in very destructive ways.
You've captured a vital point, Dr. J. Embracing our whole selves, including the shadow, is crucial for authentic living and healthier relationships. When we accept our flaws and vulnerabilities, we can address them constructively, reducing the chance of them manifesting in harmful ways. The journey of self-discovery and acceptance you describe is a powerful step towards living more fully and honestly.
I thank you for making us more compassionate when we realize that others we engage with also have a shadow, and they also have these urges, and they also have these conflicts, and they're also struggling, and many of them don't even know about them, which makes it more of a struggle.
Absolutely. Recognizing that everyone has their own struggles and hidden conflicts can foster empathy and patience in our interactions. When we understand that others may act out of unconscious defenses or unresolved issues, it becomes easier to extend compassion.
So, Dr. Freud, the big question: how do we make the unconscious conscious?
Making the unconscious conscious is a central goal of psychoanalysis. This process involves several key steps. Self-reflection, engaging in honest introspection to observe our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Working with a skilled therapist provides a safe space to explore unconscious material. Through conversation and interpretation, deeper insights can emerge. Analyzing dream content can provide clues to what lies beneath our awareness.
So, Dr. Freud, we've got self-awareness, taking time to reflect on one's own thoughts and feelings, and bearing in mind your model of the self, understanding there is an id. There is that superego. There are these different parts of ourselves that have different needs. Then therapy, having somebody who is going to listen to us non-judgmentally, where we can be completely open about our thoughts and our feelings, and then dream analysis, the interpretation of dreams, the royal road to knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind.
Precisely, these approaches offer different paths to uncovering the layers of our unconscious mind.
Now, you wrote this wonderful book, The Interpretation of Dreams. And just to be clear, dream interpretation is not a code that says one specific thing means another.
Exactly. Dreams are a complex amalgamation of thoughts, memories, and desires, woven into a symbolic tapestry by the dream work. This process transforms latent content, hidden desires, and thoughts into the manifest content of the dream, which is what we recall upon waking. Interpreting dreams involves deciphering these symbols and exploring their personal significance as they relate to our unconscious mind. It's less about fixed meanings and more about understanding the unique language of our psyche.
It's no wonder to me that psychoanalysis has become so influential in literature, in art, because so much of the unconscious operates in symbols, right? Why is it that the dream tends to be so symbolic?
Unlike our waking thoughts, which are structured by language and logic, the unconscious expresses itself through images, metaphors, and symbols. This symbolic language allows complex and often conflicting emotions and desires to be expressed in a disguised form.
I wonder if you can help me with a dream that I had when my father died. I was young at the time, I was 25. He died, he dropped dead in an instant. He was fit, healthy, and fine, and had a massive heart attack. For about a year afterwards, I kept having pretty much the same dream, that in my dream, I knew he was dead, but he would come back from the dead. And I would realize that this was preposterous, this was bizarre, this was some kind of miracle. And I would start telling people that we needed to call CNN and BBC, we needed to call the news networks, because this was the first time a human had ever come back from the dead. And we needed to understand what was going on here. And I would have this dream again and again for over a year.
The recurring image of your father returning from the dead could represent a deep longing to reverse the reality and the shock of such an unexpected event. Wanting to alert the media might symbolize a need to validate the significance of this event and your grief, making it real and acknowledged not just personally, but publicly. It's a powerful expression of the need to process and communicate profound loss.
So, Dr. Freud, you also described the dream as being a wish fulfillment. The unconscious is trying to manifest what is often not manifestable in this case. But I also need to tell you that I had a difficult relationship with my father. My father could be violent at times with myself, my brother, and my mother. He could also be very kind and gentle. He was, like all of us, multifaceted. When my father died, my relationship with him became easier. It wasn't that I wanted him to die. I can't say there was devastation because of the difficulties. So why then, particularly if the dream is a wish fulfillment, this continuous resurrection from the dead?
Dreams can be complex and multifaceted. His return might represent an opportunity to confront unresolved feelings, both positive and negative. The act of sharing this miraculous event with the world could be your psyche's way of seeking acknowledgement for the complexities of your relationship, expressing a desire to reconcile the mixed emotions tied to your father's memory.
Dr. Freud, thank you. You've helped me understand something that I've not understood for 20, 25 years, why I would keep having this dream and why I felt it necessary to call the media. I did want the difficulties in my relationship with my father validated. The truth is that my relationship with my father, as difficult as it was, has become immensely important in my work. In fact, it probably triggered my interest in psychology. I knew my father struggled. He didn't want to be violent. He didn't want to be hurtful, but he didn't know how to manage himself. I could see that. And I wanted to learn how to help people like my father and help myself. Bringing the press in this dream would be a way to make this public, to put this out there. And maybe that also represents the public work that I do today to bring these ideas to the world.
It's enlightening to see how your dream reflects such a profound connection to your personal and professional journey. Our relationships with our parents often shape who we become, and it's clear that your father's struggles had a significant impact on your path towards psychology. Your dream, in a way, symbolizes your desire to give voice to those unspoken struggles, not just for your father, but for many who face similar challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Freud. You were the trailblazer. You were the one who was willing to talk about this and to bring this to the world. And I am so grateful to you for doing this. You have made my life immeasurably better, and I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing today if it wasn't for you.
It is gratifying to know that my work has had a positive impact on you and your career.
Your work really laid the foundations for modern psychotherapy, specifically this idea of abreaction, the reliving of trauma, catharsis, that emotional outpouring, and then the interpretation and integration of those memories. And that has been immensely helpful for post-traumatic stress disorder. Where your work has not proven to be quite as effective as we would have hoped is with anxiety and depression. It seems that sometimes one can be aware of these things and still saddled with emotional distress.
You've touched on a key challenge in psychotherapy. While becoming aware of unconscious conflicts and repressed emotions through techniques like abreaction can be transformative, it doesn't always equate to immediate relief from symptoms like anxiety or depression. The integration of insights into one's life and the development of healthier coping mechanisms can be a longer, more complex process.
Your work has been channeled into other fields of psychotherapy that have proven to be more effective, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'll be speaking to the founders of those schools of therapy later in the series. But right now, I want to ask you, Dr. Freud, what do you think of the modern world?
The shifting norms around identity and relationships all contribute to a complex psychological environment. While modernity offers new opportunities for connection, and self-expression, it also brings challenges such as increased anxiety and alienation. The core conflicts and desires that drive human behavior remain, but manifest in new forms in our contemporary society.
Would you not have expected that the modern world's far greater acceptance of sexuality, sexual mores have radically transformed since your time? The large-scale acceptance of different sexual orientations. Would you not have expected that to have resolved a lot of those internal conflicts and even reduced anxiety and depression, which of course has not happened?
Your observation is astute. One might anticipate that greater acceptance of diverse sexual orientations and expressions would alleviate some internal conflicts and reduce related distress. However, while societal acceptance can reduce external pressures, the roots of anxiety and depression are complex. They often stem from a multitude of factors, including early childhood experiences, genetic predispositions, and ongoing stressors. While progress in social attitudes is significant, the internal landscape of the individual remains a complex territory.
The one question that you have not yet been able to answer, despite your 30 years of research into the feminine soul, is,
what does a woman want? It was not merely out of bewilderment, but as a reflection of the profound complexity and individuality of human desires and emotions. Women, like men, are complex individuals with their own unique desires, influenced by personal experiences, cultural contexts, and individual psychologies. The question remains an open invitation to explore the rich and varied dimensions of human desire.
I wonder if it's just that as men who love women, we are sometimes perplexed more by our own desire than them being as perplexing as we happen to think they are. Are we not projecting our own bewilderment onto them?
Deeply insightful, Dr. J. Often, what perplexes us in others may actually reflect our own inner complexities. Understanding this can lead to deeper self-awareness.
Dr. Freud, do you have a question for me?
Indeed, Justin. I'm curious to know, how has your exploration of different therapeutic approaches, including my own theories, influenced your perspective on your personal and professional life?
Thank you, Dr. Freud, and thank you for your openness to consider other therapeutic fields. As I've said, you are the father for me of psychotherapy, and I'm immensely grateful to you for the gift that you gave to the world. It does concern me that psychoanalysis itself, a very intensive kind of therapy, 3 times a week, sometimes for 2 hours, has not actually led to the sorts of transformation that I think you were hoping for. I think we see tremendous benefits from later schools of therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, even metacognitive therapy, and some others, which we'll be discussing in the future. Freud, what you gave me more than anyone was the acceptance of the shadow part of myself, that it was okay to have some of these urges, that it was okay to have some of these internal conflicts. One of the terms that you use extensively is ambivalence. Ambivalence is that, I can be betwixt and between. I want it that way and the other way. And that's because I am multifaceted and I have these different parts of me. And if I can find ways to express those parts that do not cause harm to others. For me, it's going to Africa Burn every year and being able to dress up and break down some of those social conventions and that free expression and creativity. You spoke a lot about that, right? The creative world, how that enables us to sublimate many of these urges, eros, the sexual urge, and the thanatos, the aggressive urges. These are real parts of ourselves, and that's okay. We just need to find okay ways to express them.
Your reflection is deeply insightful, Justin. The concept of embracing our shadow allows us to acknowledge and integrate all parts of our psyche, not just the socially acceptable ones. By understanding and embracing our inner conflicts and desires, we can find healthy outlets for expression. The idea of ambivalence acknowledges our complex nature, allowing for a more authentic and creative engagement with life. Your approach to channeling these energies into constructive outlets, like creative expression, is a testament to the potential for transformation within each of us.
Dr. Freud, what one thing do you want people alive today to know?
I would want people to recognize the profound impact of the unconscious mind on our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. By exploring and confronting our hidden forces with honesty and curiosity, we can gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and our motivations. This self-awareness can lead to personal growth and healing.
Thank you, Dr. Freud. May your words continue to unlock our potential for self-understanding.
Thank you, Justin. It has been a pleasure to share my insights. May your exploration of the human psyche continue to inspire and enlighten.